I'm Cynthia Short from Lexico, a transformation services consultancy. In this video, we're going to look at the culture shifts required on the journey to becoming a data-driven organization and the critical need for communications in that process. I'm joined by Lexico advisor and communications expert, Jason Evans. Thanks for joining us today, Jason.
Hey, Cindy, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
What do you think leaders need to focus in on to kind of help, all of their teams navigate this kind of change successfully?
Well, I don't think it's any surprise that, first and foremost, leaders need to set the example, right? And set the tone for having a data-driven culture. We find that companies with strong data-driven cultures tend to have top managers who set the expectation that decisions must be anchored in data, right? That starting with data is normal. That's just how things are done. It's not novel. It's not exceptional. It's the way of business. And they do this by example, right? They start their leadership meetings by looking at, detailed summaries of proposals and supporting facts to ensure that they're making evidence-based decisions, right? So they're putting these sorts of practices into action. And these sorts of things then, propagate downwards, where employees who want to be taken seriously then learn that they have to communicate with their senior leaders in the language of data, right? Communicate in their terms. And we see this propagate from there. So, first and foremost, it's setting that example. We also see the need to, communicate. This is, just fundamental to a fundamental responsibility on part of leaders. To really communicate the value, the why, the transformation story, thinking especially about how this benefits employees, how it benefits customers, how it benefits projects. So we find that leaders are regularly providing, top-down reminders about thinking data first, that they are, recognizing the efforts of those who are thinking data first, highlighting and celebrating the successes and quick wins to reinforce those behavioral changes. And they do this through a variety of channels, a variety of approaches to really meet employees on their terms, engage with employees on their terms. They're also mobilizing and empowering kind of champions throughout all levels of the organization, doing whatever they can to, consistently reinforce and activate this change. I think another thing leaders can do is really set realistic expectations, or even have realistic expectations. Our experience shows that becoming data-driven requires time, it requires focus, it requires commitment, it requires persistence. We find that organizations sometimes can minimize the amount of efforts or fail to correctly estimate the amount of time to make these sorts of wholesale transformations. So it requires patience, it requires fortitude to successfully navigate this long-term journey. And it is a journey, right? It's not an initiative, it's not a project, it is a long-term journey. But that's where I see leaders really affecting change and seeing success.
No, I agree. I think that the most successful leaders of organizations through this recognize the people side of the shift to data. And that's not uncommon. It's, regardless of any kind of wholesale major change, that's always going to be the core of it. And, it's just such an important part. I think too, the idea of, communicate. One of the things, and interested in your take too, is the nature of that communication is really important as well. Anytime you go through something major like these types of shifts, is not the time for static status report outs in terms of, here's what we've done and here's where we're going, and, kind of at that level. Yeah. Leaders really need to take responsibility for the making it personal for everyone, and making an environment where everyone can see themselves participating, being a key to the success of this. And that takes some real intentionality in terms of what and how communication unfolds throughout this, this kind of work. It really is, there's a vision that really needs to be developed and owned, and again, internalized by leadership so that they in turn can bring their teams along and empower their leaders and build advocates and all those important pieces that go into this. And without that, because it is a journey and not a initiative or project with a start and stop date necessarily, more a series of them as you go along, but that kind of ongoing intentionality in terms of communication is just key. And it has to be cornerstone, and it has to be designed smartly from day one. Communicating 6 months in, and that, in the next 2 months, you'll be seeing all these changes is not going to bode well for for any organization undergoing this kind of work. So I think that's an important thing.
Yeah, I mean, as we've said before, it needs to be, communication needs to happen early. It needs to happen often. It needs to be transparent. It needs to have a sense of authenticity. It needs to be consistent. There are all, and as was mentioned, it needs to be very intentional. Like, we really have to think through the people, the stages, the channels, the shifts in behavior and mindset that we're striving for, because each of those require a different sort of interaction, a different sort of communication. And it is critical to the success of these sorts of journeys.
Well, that is all we have for you today. We do want to hear from you about your experiences in building a data-driven organization. So if you get the chance, let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe so we can all be part of more conversations like this together. So see you next time.